All right, so I wanted to share tonight a little bit about the Vivekacudamani. And tonight the author says, now I'm going to tell you about the real nature of the Supreme Self. And this really got my attention. He goes through and he lists, obviously, some things about the nature of the Supreme Self, of this divinity that's within us, this image of God, as it were. And I like to look at each one of these as sort of being an experiment for you to try, to see if you can sense or intuit these ideals or ideas within your own self. So he says, now I'm going to tell you the real nature of the Supreme Self, realizing which man is freed from bondage and attains to liberation. So this is how you find freedom. This is how you find your enlightenment, is by coming upon this discovery, this realization. He says there is some absolute entity, some unchanging absolute, something that holds the place for the rest of the relative universe, right? We've talked about that in the past, that if there's not an absolute somewhere in the universe, something that does not move and does not change, then the relativity of the universe really seems to collapse, in my mind. Now, I'm not a well-trained philosopher in that regards, but it seems to me if you have no point that is not changing or moving, you have no point from which to measure. And I think that's part of the illusion of this world, that which makes it unreal, or seemingly so, is because we see only the changing, only the absolute. And he's suggesting that this absolute unchanging is that divinity deep within us, that point from which everything is measured, right? Because in a relative universe, you can't have big unless you have small. You always have to have something to compare something to. And so to know where you are in the universe, you have to have some point that is unchanging, immovable, from which you can measure. Otherwise, we never know anything. We can never know what is big, what is small, where we are in the world, as it were. So he says, there is some absolute entity, the eternal substratum of the consciousness of egoism. So there's some underlying thing in the universe upon which all this relativity rests. He's sort of referencing the idea of the screen behind a movie. There is some unchanging absolute that makes that movie possible. Something upon which all of the changing frames and colors and lights can be reflected. All right, so he's saying there is such a place. There has to be, he's saying, such a thing. And it is the substratum of your ego. It is what allows you to see your ego as a third party, to abstract yourself out of this ego self. It's the witness of the three states. What are the three states? The waking state, the dream state, and the dreamless sleep state. So this self is aware of everything in all three of those states. It doesn't matter how the mind and body change. This unchanging absolute self is the witness of all three of these states. He says, the witness of the three states and distinct from the five sheaths or coverings. The five sheaths or coverings are basically just what present the body, what they're kind of stepping down from this higher self to lower and lower vibrations until you get this gross manifestation of the world. And so there is something within us that is a witness to all of these things and not a part of it, but a witness to it, all right? Which knows everything that happens in the waking state, right? You are that observer, so you see everything that's going on in your body, mind, in the waking state. You can always watch or look at these things. Then it knows everything in the dream state and in profound sleep. You know, profound sleep is when there is no sensory information going on within the mind. There's no dream. There is the repose or this bliss of nothingness. And we know that because that's when you wake up in the morning and say, oh, I had a good night's sleep last night. Well, if there wasn't at least some witness to that night of sleep, even if there was no dream and no thought, you would not know that you had a good night's sleep, right? So something is there that carries the continuity of you from the night before till the morning after, even if there is no conscious thought, even if there is no consciousness of continuity. There is something within you that maintains that sense of I through all of the different states and all of the different changes of mind and body. And aware of the presence or absence of the mind and its functions, and which is the background of the notion of egoism. Right? So we already talked about that this self contains your ego, but is not your ego. Your ego is a particularized version of this universal infinite self, this infinite awareness within you. And he says that this is that. Well, in Vedantic language, a rather humorous statement, this is that, means that this is that divinity. And they always use a pronoun because it's undefined. They always point at the divine because God cannot be described, cannot have a word of description because he is all description, or she is all description, or that is all description. And the nature of that, we only know the last three things that the sages see before they dissolve into that experience, that non-experience of unity, right? Because in one without a second, there is no experiencer of the experience. It is one without a second. And if there is only one without a second, who is there to describe? What attribute could be perceived? You see, so this gets into some pretty highfalutin philosophy there. But this is that. So this self within you, this unchanging witness, this witness of the three states, this witness of all the sheaths of the body, this witness of both the conscious and unconscious mind, you know, talking about the three states. It's like this witness is God, is that divinity. And so it's really quite fun because it gives you something to put that's got a handle on it. You can sit there and become aware of awareness. Just practice becoming aware of awareness. That's a form of meditation. And this awareness carries within it a bliss. That's why they say that our nature is one of bliss, one of wisdom, and it is that existence. So you can experience this existence, and that's a form of meditation also that brings about a great sense of peace within, which is one of the big benefits of having a practice. You know, and a practice is not requiring that you believe any of this. Practice is quieting the mind to see what's there. It's an experiment in life, in living, and knowing who and what you are, and what your place in this very odd experience of living is. So he says, which itself sees all, but which no one beholds, right? Because this is rather interesting. Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, in that book, I Am That, proposes that we all live in our own universe, which if you think about that, contemplate that notion, it seems pretty true. And so in that state, he says that this self sees all, but no one sees it. You can't see it. Why? Because it's like your face. It is you. It cannot be objectified. It is the eternal subject. So there's no way to take this self, which manifests as your particular personality and named individual. You can't see it because it is you, right? You can see its reflection, mind you, just like you can see the reflection of your face, but you will never see your face, you know. But you can see its reflection, and they say that this world in its entirety is a reflection of this self on the mind. How's that for fun? So think about that for a moment, that this whole world is your own reflection. No particular of it. The entire thing is you. And you are watching this self from this absolute position. And that is realization, to know that you are not a particular, to know that and find and experience, or at least have an intuitive experience of this unchanging self that is beyond your name, beyond your ideas, beyond your mind, beyond your body, beyond your attributes. That thing, that one that all of us are before we become ourselves, before we move into this very comfortable set of limitations and restrictions. So it sees everything, but none beholds it. It illumines the intellect, but which they cannot illumine. This is that. So, you know, nothing can shed a light on it. It is the source of everything, right? So, and it cannot be studied as separate from yourself. It is your very own self. by which this universe is pervaded. It's like in your dream. In your dream and all of the different experiences of it, it's all pervaded by you. And that's what he's saying about this world, same condition. This world is pervaded by your consciousness, and that consciousness in its absolute state is your true self. By which this universe is pervaded, but which nothing pervades, right? Which shining all this universe shines as its reflection. And what does it shine? It shines consciousness. It shines awareness. And this world, this mind that we live in, is the reflection of that consciousness. And your ego self, the self of you that has a name, that self of you that has a personality, is a misunderstanding. You've identified with the reflection. You have thought that you are the image in the mirror, not realizing that there's something looking in the mirror. And so this is what the Vivekacudamani says about you, about the truth of you.